But there are so many Filipinos in the crowd tonight, so many flags. Thank you!
Alex Eala walked off the court in Toronto looking like someone who had nothing left to give. Her 7-match winning streak, the one that had carried her all the way from a breakthrough title in Washington into the 4th round of a WTA 1000 event, was finally over. Belinda Bencic had beaten her in straight sets, 6-4, 6-2, and for the first time in weeks, Eala wasn't talking about her next opponent. She was talking about a haircut, about letting her nails grow out, about spending a few days with friends and getting her mind as far away from a tennis court as possible. After 8 matches in 12 days, it sounded like exactly the kind of reset a 21-year-old needed. Then something unexpected happened. A few days later, Eala walked into Cincinnati, and the reception waiting for her looked nothing like what you'd expect for a player coming off a straight-sets loss. The Filipino flags were already there. The chants were already there. Before she had played a single point, the crowd at the Lindner Family Tennis Center was reacting to her like a returning champion. Whatever had transformed Toronto hadn't stayed behind in Toronto. It had crossed the border with her. That's what makes Cincinnati worth paying attention to. Eala wasn't walking into this tournament as the same player who had walked into Toronto. She was now ranked 20th in the world. She'd won the first WTA singles title of her career in Washington, beating Jessica Pegula in the final and becoming the first Filipino player ever to claim one. In Cincinnati, she was seeded 17th, the highest WTA 1000 seeding of her career, which meant something concrete. The tournament's expanded 96-player draw gave its top 32 seeds a first-round bye, so Eala wasn't being thrown straight back into competition after the grind of Toronto. She'd earned herself some breathing room, and the names surrounding her in that draw weren't a stretch anymore, they were the sport itself. Aryna Sabalenka, Elena Rybakina, Pegula again. Coco Gauff. Just months earlier, Eala had been fighting to prove she belonged in that company. Now she was seated alongside it. But the ranking is only half of what's interesting here. The stranger development is happening in the stands. Washington lit the fuse. Toronto showed how big the explosion could get. What Cincinnati reveals is something different, that Eala's audience travels with her. In Toronto, thousands of Filipino fans turned her matches into their own kind of event. Flags, chants, entire families making noise loud enough that broadcasters, opponents, and tournament staff all took notice. Eala herself later said the atmosphere was something almost impossible to describe to anyone who hadn't been inside it. Now that same energy has shown up in another American city entirely. That changes the usual math. Normally, a rising player leaves one tournament and starts the next with a clean slate. Eala doesn't seem to get that anymore. She leaves one city and the crowd doesn't stay behind. It follows her to the next one. Which raises the real question hanging over Cincinnati. What happens when a player stops being the story of a single tournament and starts carrying an audience from one event to the next? She's already proven she can generate momentum on court. She's already proven she can win a title. She's already climbed into the top 20. Toronto proved her popularity could shape a tournament's atmosphere all on its own. Cincinnati is the next test, and it's a tougher one because now the question isn't whether people will show up. It's whether they'll still show up after a loss, and whether Eala can perform with a crowd that's already expecting something from her. Consider what she's actually walking in with: a WTA title, a career-high ranking, a WTA 1000 seed, a first-round bye, and a fan base that has already proven 3 tournaments running that it isn't going anywhere. So the real headline out of Toronto was never that Eala lost. It's that even after losing, none of the momentum around her disappeared. The haircut happened. The nails got trimmed. The short reset ended, and the next chapter had already started before she'd even landed in Ohio. Look at how fast the numbers have caught up to the noise. Washington gave her a WTA 500 trophy and a place in history as the first Filipino singles champion on tour. That alone pushed her to a career-high ranking of number 20. Then came the seed, 17th, and the bye that comes with it. But the attention arrived first, and the rankings have been chasing it ever since. In Toronto, more than 10,000 fans packed center court just to watch her play. Tickets vanished almost as soon as they went on sale. The stands turned into a sea of Philippine flags, and organizers even added Filipino food to the concession stands. Tournament director Carl Hale called her nothing short of a blessing to the sport. Even Bensick, the player who ended her run, admitted afterward that most of that crowd had been rooting for her opponent. Pegula said something similar after facing Eala in Washington, thanking the Filipino fans for the atmosphere they created. Goff went further, pointing out that the new audience Eala is pulling into tennis is something the entire sport stands to benefit from. That matters because this isn't just noise online. These are people actually showing up, tournament after tournament, city after city. They aren't waiting for Eala to become a star before they commit. They're already treating her like one. And that flips the traditional model tournaments have relied on for years. Usually it's ranking, then seeding, then promotion, then audience. With Eala, it's happening in reverse. Performance built attention. Attention built a community. That community is now generating demand. And demand is pulling her ranking up to match what the crowds already believed about her. Of course, that creates its own kind of pressure. Toronto set an enormous bar. Every walk onto a Cincinnati court now comes loaded with more eyes on her than before. Every flag in the crowd is a reminder that people are watching and that they expect something. And she isn't arriving fresh. She's coming off a brutal stretch. The streak, the title, the deep Toronto run, and then the exhaustion of a loss to Bensick. So Cincinnati isn't really asking whether Eala can pull a crowd anymore. That's been answered. It's asking whether she can perform in front of a crowd that now expects her to. There's also the matter of timing. Cincinnati sits right before the U.S. Open, which makes it the last real test before the biggest stage of the year. If Eala can put together another strong run here, she won't walk into New York as simply a player who had a good summer. She'll arrive with a title, a top 20 ranking, a WTA 1000 seed, a growing reputation for upsetting the sport's biggest names, and a fan base that has already shown it will travel with her wherever she goes. That's an entirely different starting point than the one she had just a few months ago. But maybe the most telling detail from Toronto wasn't about tennis at all. It was that after the loss, Eala didn't sound like someone desperate to immediately prove herself again. She talked about getting away from the sport for a couple of days, a haircut, her nails, time with friends, small, ordinary things. It might sound trivial next to rankings and trophies, but it may actually say the most about where her career is headed. Because the next phase for Eala isn't just about playing more tennis. It's about learning to live inside everything that tennis has now built around her. The crowds, the expectations, the pressure of being the player thousands of people specifically travel to see. She's already proven she can win when nobody expects it. Cincinnati is asking whether she can perform now that everybody does. That's a different kind of challenge entirely, and how she answers it will shape not just this tournament, but how she walks into the U.S. Open right behind it. Eventually, every streak ends. Every ranking shifts. Every rising player hits a rough patch, and crowds have a way of moving on to the next story. What matters is what's left standing once the initial excitement wears off, and Cincinnati is where we start finding that out. Washington created the breakthrough. Toronto proved the audience was real. Cincinnati is where we find out whether Alex Eala can carry both of those things at once, because this time she isn't walking in as the surprise. She's walking in as one of the players the entire tournament is watching. She's already proven she can win when nobody expects it. Cincinnati is asking whether she can perform now that everybody does. That's a different kind of challenge entirely, and how she answers it will shape not just this tournament, but how she walks into the U.S. Open right behind it. Eventually, every streak ends. Every ranking shifts. Every rising player hits a rough patch, and crowds have a way of moving on to the next story. What matters is what's left standing once the initial excitement wears off, and Cincinnati is where we start finding that out. Washington created the breakthrough. Toronto proved the audience was real. Cincinnati is where we find out whether Alex Eala can carry both of those things at once, because this time she isn't walking in as the surprise. She's walking in as one of the players the entire tournament is watching.